Hi,
Hello,
I'm Julian.
I'm Tom.
We are Team Binge. We are back to talk about Masters of the Air. We will be covering part 5, 6, and 7 on this podcast. We took some time to gather ourselves because honestly, we're probably living in the tryingest time of all human history right now as we're recording. Just trying to get podcasts out. I don't know that anyone has had a more difficult time or more struggle at anything other than us podcasters. Tom, those were your words earlier today. Please tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, this is a difficult time to be a guy in. No, I was gonna make a joke. I've been away for a while, so you're not getting my best right now.
All right, that's okay. We're just happy you're here. Thank you all of you for joining us again. So I do want to say, if you haven't watched 5, 6, and 7 of Masters of the Air, take a plane and depart and go to the Flack House to enjoy some rowing and some golf, I'm assuming. I do like that when they go to the Flack House, they just fight each other on rowboats. So you're just like, well, let's just get them back in those planes then. Anyways, I'll start this off, Tom. I typically get your temperature, but since you've been away and you're off your game, I'll start by saying I'm done comparing this to the other Band of Brothers in the Pacific. I'm just gonna take this show as it is. I would say 1 through 4 had a certain vibe and a certain energy and like kind of a formula of, hey, we're going to do this and then we're going to spend a lot of time in the air and it's going to look beautiful. But in terms of like character development, in terms of knowing who people are, because everyone's wearing oxygen masks, you're just not going to feel that connection. I felt like once we hit part 5, that like there was definitely a better feel for who people were, what this world was like, as opposed to just these like beautiful epic sky paintings, I'll call them. And so I think my opinion of the show grew for 5 and 6. I have some thoughts on 7, one particular thought on 7, but I did enjoy 5, and I don't know if you know this, but they actually switched directors. It was the same director through 1 through 4. It was Kerry Joji Fukunaga, who I'm sure I just butchered his name, but he did No Time to Die. He was the director of that last Bond movie,
Okay.
No Time to Die, and he's done some other stuff, but I think he's very much a visual guy, which you would hope most directors would be. But the people that took over, Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, have the next couple of episodes, and the show had a different feel. I don't know. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I feel like we got almost bombarded with characters that kind of came in and out in those first 4, where we kind of knew who the main guys were, and like Egan and Clevin, but like I felt like Crosby kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. Now that they're featuring him a little bit more in these next couple episodes, I think was good. Bringing in Rosenthal, I thought was a really powerful character through these 3 episodes. But it was nice to kind of get back into the sky, because I think in episode 4 we weren't really there. It was just kind of more showing kind of Egan's I don't know, like his rumbling through London or wherever he was.
Right, right. Rumbling through London is what they called it. That's for sure.
But I mean, I think more so even than the first 4 episodes, which were really good in terms of the action. Like episode 5 here was just bonkers in terms of the scale, the scope, just the sequences in the air. I thought was incredible.
I agree. I just enjoyed 5 a lot more than the other ones. What has also happened since the last time we recorded, Tom, is I ordered Harry Crosby's book. Harry Crosby, spoilers, survived the war and wrote a book called A Wing and a Prayer. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know why the show didn't just use his book as opposed to Masters of the Air. And I would explain it in 2 ways. Like, A Wing and a Prayer is one guy's story, and it's very much at the human level of who he dealt with. But he still, since he worked as like the group navigator, he had like interactions with the higher ups and saw kind of the big picture. And so as he's writing the book, you get that whole perspective. Whereas Masters of the Air, the book they took, is almost like a history book in terms of like scope and scale. And while it tells some stories about, in fact, it references Crosby's book in Masters of the Air. And so I just feel like there might have been a miss here. And what's interesting is reading the book, how much of it is actually in the show. But I feel like if they would have used that book, it would have been more humanizing as opposed to trying to like tell all of these stories in 9 episodes, if that makes sense. So
no, I agree. Yeah, because I think it was a little bit disjointed. Like the thought was it's going to be Buck and Egan. Like those are the guys you're following all the way through. So kind of when they introduced Crosby, it was a little bit. It just didn't. It seemed a little out of place to start. But now that they've kind of like built him in and kind of showing him being kind of promoted and getting more kind of like contact with like the brass, if you will. It makes it more enjoyable because he has a more broader scale and understanding of the troop.
Sure, it's also a little bit strange they like had Crosby be the narrator, and then for like an episode he wasn't the narrator. There was like no I don't know. Whereas like when you take I've done it already. When you take Band of Brothers, they would like swap the narrator out for the character that was the focus of that episode, and I thought that. I almost wish they would have kept this formula or that formula for this. It's just like stick to a character per episode. But because of the casualty rate, I don't know that they could. And some of these guys didn't come home and write books. Some of these guys, came home and just were super awesome and were like, typewriters aren't for me. I'm not going to tell my story. So let's dive into part 5. Just in detail, and since it's been out for a little while, I'm just going to run through this quickly. But the aftermath of this is Clevin has gone down, and so Egan is dealing with this. And when Egan deals with loss, he gets drunk and he goes to a plane out on the flight deck and either throws things at Biddick or sits sadly until he's summoned to drunkenly drive his Jeep off the flight deck. I don't know.
I mean, I feel this was powerful to me because obviously we've seen 5, 6, and 7 here, so we know that Buck isn't dead. He's just a prisoner of war here. But I was kind of surprised when they did this. Like, I thought they really had kind of killed off that character being such a big actor and name. But like the vibe kind of around the base was the fact that like Buck died. He kind of had that sense from the other men that he was kind of invincible. So I think when they saw him go down, like the morale, I think definitely went down too.
Sure. What's funny is in Crosby's book, he calls Clevin Bucky, Egan Bucky, and there was a third officer that was a Bucky. So the show does Buck and Bucky, which I think is actually, Clevin did go by Buck, but in Crosby's book, there were 3 Buckies, and I was That's like, great. Oh, I bet a TV executive was immediate, like, no, we can't do that. We've already got oxygen masks on everyone's face. We can't call everyone Bucky. But anyways, so this is also the aftermath of Bremen, which I believe was them attacking the submarine pens. This really happened. Crosby, their ship got separated. They had to crash land somewhere else. They did end up finding the one tree in a field and crashing into it. He talks about it in his book. But what's interesting, I thought about this return is how quickly the staff on the ground, once a crew was deemed like casualties or POWs or down, there was like a psychological thing where you got rid of evidence of them as quick as possible, just so that the crews that were still alive, like it did not bring down morale. So I thought it was funny. These guys showing up and their bunks have their footlockers are gone. Their bunks are changed over. There's new people in their room. And so they're like, we're not dead. And then they're like, let's go have a drink. And so they head back to the club. So that, that legitimately happened to Crosby. The one thing that is not much in the book, but the show does, is just this relationship between Bubbles and Crosby and how close they are. And you see ultimately Crosby replacing Bubbles as he essentially gets a desk job because he's been a good navigator. And so he gets promoted and Bubbles gets sent to back to flight status, which just sounds like a real crap thing to do with your friend. But, that's the
But he gives him back his lucky stove globe, right? Because wasn't it Bubbles that originally gave it to Crosby, and now Crosby's giving it back?
Yep, and that's what killed Bubbles. So, um, this is the first time, I think we've seen it in other episodes, but this was the first time that the red light was a little bit prevalent. I felt like they pointed it out, and apparently what the red light meant is that everyone was on standby for a mission, and they would stop serving alcohol at that point. So that was like a message to the barkeep to put it away. What I thought was funny, and Biddick, who we lost in episode 2 or 3, that was who played Biddick. Tom, help me out.
Oh, Barry
Coogan.
Coogan. Barry Lionel Coogan.
Yeah, Lionel Coogan. That's right. So right before last call, he would order doubles before he would leave. So they would pour him 2 doubles of scotch.
That's great.
So that was his tradition. So before the light would go red, if he could anticipate it, 2 doubles. But
yeah, I do feel like they featured that more. I don't know if it's just in 5 or maybe some of the other episodes where they're just kind of constantly getting called. And it's like just that orange glow, that light filling up that place, and like everybody's demeanor then just kind of goes down.
Yeah, there were a couple of things in this episode particularly, like where the ominous like edge wasn't from, flak blowing up in the sky. It was like the light going red, and you just feel like the show's mood shift. And then later on, when Egan is flying and those hundreds of enemy fighters come out of the air, and it plays like a horror film, right?
Yeah.
Like there's like a music hit that happens.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I feel like when you see all that, is it the Luftwaffe or whatever? Like those guys come in when they roll in like from an altitude much higher, and you see like all those contrails coming down. Like it's just such a crazy visual. And I just try to put yourself in those guys' shoes and seeing all this stuff like happen. It was completely wild. And some of the cinematics they did here, to your point about like the music cues. There's that like slow-mo shot, I think, of like the debris falling around them, and it's like seemingly just floating around. Just beautifully shot, and just really brings to life the horror of this kind of fighting they're doing in the air.
Right. And I don't know, there was just certain cues in this episode that made everything so... And there's the juxtaposition of like them being in the club, like music, people survived, and then they roll to red light, and then just this terrible mission that they have to go on. Some things I want to mention is Egan ditches his signature white jacket before this mission because he says Buck always hated it, which, once again, all these luck charms that we're handing out and changing don't really do the owner any good.
No.
The thing I wanted to mention, you talked about kind of the fighters rolling in that moment. Just for reference, I don't know if this helps anyone out, but based on the book, from what I understand, is like a B-17, like kind of their like speed. They're going at like 150 miles an hour. Like that's kind of typical. And those fighter planes are going like 200, 300. So that's like the closing speed of a fighter. Now, if I'm wrong on that, if you're a World War II buff and I just, like you just did a spit take, I don't care. You can email me at teambingepodcast@gmail.com. I will read it. I will then crumple it up, and I will throw it 600 miles an hour to the wastebasket across the room. Yes, Tom, I print every email I ever receive.
I'm pretty sure those jets were going like at least 3,000 to 4,000 miles per hour.
Get him, guys. That
Come
guy's
at me, bro.
Tom is really wrong. Honestly, Tom's email is the same as mine, so the result will be the same. Although Tom doesn't print emails, Tom handwrites every email he receives out, reads it, and then throws it away. So
yeah, my calligraphy is getting pretty good.
Oh, so pretty, just the prettiest. This leads to this battle that's happening with Egan, and I don't know, the actor that plays Egan, Tatum Callum, I don't love the character, but I think he does a fabulous job. Like you can see the frustration as planes are like having mechanical failures and bailing out, and then just the horror of the attack that happens, and then his ship is essentially buys it on this one, and he's got to they've got to bail. There's a very funny moment where him and the pilot are like, you jump first, no, you jump first. And then they get shot at and he's like, oh, I'm going. And I just thought that was a great moment that they captured there.
I thought he was going to push like the other guy out and then go back into the pilot seat and try to fly it or something.
Right. No, unfortunately not. The one thing that happens on that crew that I thought was just fascinating, just things you don't think about, is like the one guy, he's got his wounded buddy and he has to hook up his parachute and try and get him off the ship. And just the heroism these guys had to do in order to, like, even though they were going to end up in enemy territory, just get him out of the plane so they have a chance to float down. We're introduced, I don't think in this episode, but this is where we see Rosie flying his first mission. And then it goes so terribly that Rosie's crew is out there alone. And I don't know if this is historically accurate. It kind of took me out of the show a little bit that he was like flying his bomber almost like a fighter. But I understand what they're doing. I think as they're losing, their lead guys, they need Rosie Rosenthal was like a legend in this unit historically. They have this cool scene where he's flying in order to put his gunners in a better position to defend them, and he starts humming, and that comes into play in the next episode. And I don't know, I thought this was well shot. I was kind of like, I was a little bit afraid they were going to have him start like rolling the plane and doing nosedives and actively going after the fighters. But as I rewatched it, I was like, okay, he's just kind of evasive maneuvering because he's all alone, trying to put them in a good position.
Yeah, I'm with you. At first, I was like, "Oh, is he gonna do a Star Fox thing where he does like the full loop around and then gets behind the guy?"
There's a reference.
But when Rosie kind of came on here, this was as I'm watching the show, I'm like, they're trying to bring in another kind of main actor to kind of play off and seemingly kind of replace Clevin, right? Like if he's gone, then they're bringing this other guy. I was like kind of slow to like adopt this new character, but I felt like they did such a great job of introducing him here as kind of like trying to be cool, calm, and collected for his crew, and they're the last like plane in the air, and then what they do with him in 6 and 7. I like really love his character, and I'm glad they're featuring him more.
Right, he's played by Nate Mann, who is someone I've not seen him in anything else. But I mean, very much they're like, all right, we're gonna take a guy that looks like Clark Gable. We're going to give him that pencil-thin mustache that everyone loved, and he's just going to be absolutely fabulous in this show. And Nate Mann, kudos to you, doing a great job. From that mission, no planes return but Rosie's, and it's just a terrible moment as they're counting the planes. Really, they don't have to count very high.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that they even like made it home with as the sole plane is amazing in and of itself. But like as he's getting off and he's like inspecting the horror and shock that is his plane and like seeing what is left of it, like I mean, very, very, very dramatic to see his reactions to all of this is crazy.
Sure. And then this, they have the debrief where it's like no shoots, plane exploded. It's just devastating. And then it closes with Crosby reading the letter that Bubbles wrote, thinking that Crosby was dead when they crash landed into the field. And so he's reading it, and it's just absolutely devastating. So, part 5, to your point, it still had like an air battle, but that wasn't like the focus and where we spent all of our time. I mean, we spent our time with Egan dealing with the loss of Clevin, Rosie on his first mission, or maybe not his first mission, but the one where he's the lone survivor. And so I don't know. I felt like this episode hit me harder than the first 4 did. And so I was super stoked for 6, which we can now dive into. And
let's dive into it.
Let's know. Oh, too soon, Tom. Too soon.
It's a Luftwaffe that's nosediving.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, you turned that one on. It's good. That was some verbal gymnastics you just did. Some verbal dogfighting, as we like to say in the Air Corps. All right, part 6. I mean, we can divide this into 3 storylines. It's essentially Crosby getting sent to Oxford to talk about the difference between men and women and solve that crisis, which I got news for you, Tom. They fixed it in World War II. And then Egan having bailed out, trying to survive in occupied, I guess in Germany. And then Rosie being sent after 3 tough missions in 3 days, being sent to the Flak House or the Rest House. And so let's just talk Crosby's storyline first. I think it's easier than jumping back and forth. Having read the book, I actually they took this stuff almost straight from his memoir. Crosby is legitimately sent to this strange conference that is talking about how Americans and British, their alignment, and a lot of it is conferences about how much British women loved American men and what that was doing to the morale of British men. And so I thought this was all kind of like a showism. And then I read the chapter on this, and they took some of these conversations word for word from Crosby's book. I thought this thing where he meets Sandra they changed her name, but this is exactly what happens. He was put in a room. They used the initials of his roommate, and it shows up, and it's this Sandra woman. And so having read the book, when I first watched Crosby's storyline in this, I thought it was a show, doing a show thing. But I mean, it turns out a bunch of it was true in terms of the conversations. And I honestly, from Crosby's perspective, I just thought how silly it would be to be at that conference having those conversations. But it was interesting.
Yeah, and I like how this episode did, both with Crosby and Rosie here, taking them out of the war for some sort of
respite.
Yeah, a distraction from the war. So sending Crosby to Oxford to do this seems kind of silly, and the way Rosie treats his trip to the Rest House was very interesting too. But yeah, the introduction of Sandra, this character, and kind of helping, Crosby deal with the burden that he kind of has still of Bubbles' death, and feels like it could have or should have been him. And I like that Sandra ultimately kind of reminds him this is nobody's fault but one person. Hitler is the one responsible for all of this death and all this demise. You can't put any of this on your own shoulders.
Yeah, I thought that was a powerful moment. Also, I think what's powerful is that Harry's married and adultery is against the good book. I think it's important. I just want to put that out into the world right now. I don't know where the show's going or what's happening with all the romantic tension in this room where they're drinking scotch on the floor next to a roaring fire on a bearskin rug, and both of them are in bearskin robes, and both of their cups are on red bearskin coasters on a bearskin table. But
with bearskin koozies?
With bearskin koozies. I had to go with coaster because I couldn't remember koozie. Where were you, Tom? Where were you 20 seconds ago?
When you started saying "kuh," I thought you were like, oh, he's going to say koozie. No, he went coaster.
Oh, you were like, oh, no, we're a podcast. Oh. We're a podcast for kids. Don't say.
Bearskin condoms?
No, boo. Great. Now I've got to bleep it. Anyways, I think had I not read the book, I would have found this storyline kind of not unbelievable, but just okay, they're taking some liberties here. But nope, they pulled all this stuff from his book. So
that's pretty cool. How far have you finished the book at this point? Are you still midway through?
I'm 3 pages in, Tom. That's no.
You've gotten a lot out of it so far. Very dense book.
No, I'm probably 5/7 of the way through the book. I would describe it.
Thank you for that math.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll let you have some time.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit Shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
All right. I think we'll just say the more exciting and more tense storyline of this episode was Egan trying to survive. So we see him parachuting in. All I could think about was, oh man, your ankles and knees would really take a blow as you fell.
This
into
guy's
that.
got drinker's knees.
Oh, that's true. He does have drinker's knees.
You know he does.
Good point. My drinker's knees hurt because of his drinker's knees. I like how he shows up at the farm and there's kids and he's like, "Hey kids, American. I hope you guys are having a great day." And those scheming little kids are immediately like, "Americana," and they give him up. And then the chase begins. I found all of this extremely well shot, very tense. I did not know what was going to happen. I mean, obviously, I didn't think they were going to kill him. But, I mean, there's just some, harrowing moments during all of this.
Oh, and him, hiding in the stream among, those, bamboo reeds or whatever it was. And so much of this sequence is just silence of him trying to hide and survive. Just brilliantly shot and very, very dramatic for sure.
Sure. All that native German bamboo that he was hiding in. I gotcha. I got what you're
Reeds,
saying.
I don't know what they are.
No. We'll stick with bamboo. And then when he was breathing out of one, like Boogaloo in the Jungle Book. Anyways, I think I got that right. Maybe.
I think he put a little lily pad hat on too. It had a little frog on top.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So he gets taken. He gets turned over to the police. So, just for some historical perspective, once again from the books, is these flyers were actually told hey, if you are down, if you can't escape, if you need to turn yourself in, go to some sort of German military or German police, because the German military, German police, their feeling was, hey, we have to treat these POWs, not, and I'm speaking in broad terms, but essentially it's we have to treat POWs in a way because our POWs will be treated the same way. There's some reciprocity, there's some respect. And so the last thing you wanted to do was bomb a city and then land amongst that civilian population that was pulling family out of the rubble, because you know who's going to beat you to death with a shovel is those guys. And so he gets turned over by these farmers to the police. And then we have this terrible moment where him and some other POWs are being marched through a street, and you're seeing hey, this is the destruction that has been wrought, and these people are not happy about it.
Oh, well, yeah, too. And I think it's the way the show shows Egan going through the destruction that he brought on, and all of his guys with the bombing and everything else. Because I think at one point in the previous episode, he was very callous about bombing this place that had women and children and civilians and all that stuff. He was like, oh, this is war, this is what it is. And then now he gets put right into the thick of it and actually sees the destruction. It was very well shot, and I think very powerful.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point. There's one point where they talk about people are going to be at mass. We're bombing so near a church or something like that. And he says, "Are you kidding? This is war. This is what we do." And so I think, to your point, the show did a great job kind of showing those two sides. I had a difficult time. They bring him in for interrogation, and the interrogator, did you recognize the gentleman that was doing the interrogation?
I didn't until you put it in the outline. But yeah, what was this guy from the show?
I don't remember his name, and I feel terrible about it because he's so good. But he's one of the main characters in the Netflix series Dark, which is a timey-wimey German incredible series. And as he's sitting there just with that little smirk, he seemed, first off, when the smirk, what it meant to me was, you guys know me from Dark. Do you recognize me from Dark? That's what the smirk said. And then the smirk said, I know everything about you, Egan. I'm gonna turn your world upside down. And just, I don't know. I thought this was a fascinating, harrowing scene, and both these guys played it very well. And I mean, he knew we knew him from Dark. That's why he was smirking like that.
And this was, I feel like there's been a handful of interrogations, but this is the one where the guy is like trying to almost be buddy-buddy with Egan, right? To like have him give up some stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Tom, you don't slap someone first and then be like, hey, tell me all about your airplanes. You befriend them. You show them, you offer them some bourbon, or you offer them a cigarette. Maybe you offer them the DVD series Dark, which you starred in on Netflix. Maybe you give them your Netflix password. There's a ton of things you can do to earn their trust first. You don't waterboard them immediately. You waterboard them after they've watched, seasons 1, 2, and most of 3, and then before they can get to the finale of Dark, you waterboard them. And you're like, you can't
torture.
watch the finale until you tell me about the planes.
I do appreciate that Egan just continues to repeat his rank and serial number. Is that kind of the thing to do?
Name, rank, and serial number is all he is required. And so I thought this was a great back and forth. I found it very harrowing, and you could also kind of see how, like, the interrogator is almost giving him like an out, like, hey, we already know all this. You're just kind of confirming it. So you're not actually giving us any, like, you're not giving up any secrets. Like, hey, can you just kind of confirm this? We know that. And so you could see kind of the soft interrogation. And then what I did not realize, and I think as we learn through this and then 7, is how each part of the German military, in terms of POWs, took care of their counterparts. So the Luftwaffe was in charge of these guys' prisons. And so he threatens him during this conversation with the SS coming in and taking over. And that meant a much eviler and much more terrible organization could be like doing this interrogation, where they most certainly aren't going to let you watch seasons 1, 2, and 3. They're just going to show you that 30-second trailer and then waterboard you. That's probably what was going to happen. But
yeah,
I found this all very, very fascinating. And Egan then gets taken to a Stalag, which is a funny name for a terrible place.
Well, yeah, and we see, like, as they're getting loaded up in this train to go to this POW camp, we see, like, the Jewish people that were rounded up getting taken to concentration camps, just those harrowing images of, like, their arms coming out of the trains. And, like, I think one guy tries to, like, run away, and they just shoot him cold there. Like, just absolute, like, devastation of what's going on in this war that, I'm like, it's the stuff that needs to be seen in these sequences to really understand the scope and scale of what we were up against.
Right. And they don't do it in this show, but I mean, there's stories of these guys being put in these cattle cars and just like days without like the light coming through the slats. They didn't have room to sit. They didn't have room to lie down. They didn't have, guess what? There's no porta-john in the cattle car that they're being transferred by. So just like brutal situation. But this all leads to him entering the Stalag. And I thought this was interesting how this was shot. Like the guys lining, almost like welcoming their friends.
Right. And to see like Buck Clevin like still being alive was great. And I think I watched a video on kind of recapping this, and apparently this is actually what he said. Buck said to Bucky when he came in, saying, "What took you so long?" Which is pretty funny. Yep.
I mean, a lot of this stuff, yeah, they took from like eyewitnesses' accounts and people writing them down. You mentioned that. I wanted to bring up, once again, Harry Crosby's book. He talks about that situation with Buck Clevin where they're getting all shot up and the pilot wants to bail. And Buck tells him, you sit down. We're going to sit down and take it. And then they get that plane home. That actually happened. Like, that was written about in, like, Stars and Stripes. And so Buck Clevin became, like, a legend even outside of his group for those types of things. So I have no doubt that he had a very quippy. Tom, we're gonna role play a little bit, and Actually, I don't know. That maybe feels a little disrespectful. I was going to say, when I show up at the Stalag, what's the first thing you're saying through the fence? But it's probably like, you owe me money or something like that. So we'll just move on. Let's talk about Rosie Rosenthal's visit to the rest house. And I found this fascinating. Were you familiar with this concept that they would send flyers to these places to kind of get their minds right?
No, I had no idea. Like, I mean, like at this point in like war, I mean, I feel like the name for like what it's called shell shock or PTSD, like it didn't really have a name, right? So like they had a psychiatrist there was trying to kind of help these guys like understand what they were doing and try to like talk through their feelings a little bit. And the way like Rosie kind of comes at it, it's like I'm not here, like I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to cry about it. I just want to get back in the seat and do my job. I thought it was very, very interesting, but I didn't know this exact type of thing existed then.
Yeah, I think someone came in and realized, hey, the amount of stress these guys are on, we need to be able to send them on R&R somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, whether or not they called it combat fatigue or, earlier Colonel Harding, I think, is like flak happy. He's like, are we flak happy or something like that? And he makes it like a derogatory term. Which I don't think the show has done a great job. But like those colonels, like the guy with the thin mustache, we never see him fly a mission, but those guys would fly missions. Those guys we see it in part 7. But like those colonels, they maybe didn't fly every mission, but a lot of the important ones, like it's really tough to command a group of like cowboy pilots if you don't put yourself in that seat every once in a while. Right. And so I think one thing that leadership and the show hasn't shown, but it did historically prove out that those guys did, get in that lead plane and did go with them up in the air. But what I thought was fascinating about this, and I don't know that the show did a great job, is like Rosie Rosenthal is Jewish. And so like at this point, they kind of knew what was happening to Jewish people by the Nazis in Germany. And so I almost got the sense that, and I don't know that the show hit it directly, but you get the sense like the motivation for Rosie is like people are being like subjugated, tortured, murdered, like sitting here in this rest house is not helping them. And so while I had 3 missions in 3 days that sucked, and we were like the lone survivor on one of them, like I want to go back and do my job. And I'm playing with this a little bit because once again, from the books, there is like a rumor goes around that like Rosie's family is in a concentration camp and that's what motivates him. But he like straight up was like, no, that wasn't true. But I do get the sense from like what the show is doing here that there is an internal motivation from him that he feels like this is a waste of resources and time. But I think what the show does well is it's not just about the pilot. Like you see Rosie reading a book and he's like watching the guys on the rowboat splash each other like they're simulating a fight. And there's also that beautiful moment where him and some of his crew are playing cards, and one of them tells the story about, hey, we were all alone up there. Like it was terrifying. And then over the intercom, someone starts humming and it was Rosie. And he was like, I didn't feel alone. And so I almost felt like the show was like, hey, Rosie, you may not need it. Like you, and I think he still did, but it's like, you're a crew and your guys need it. Like we're talking 18-year-old kids, like manning a waist gun. Like, so I don't know. I found all this very, very interesting and well done. And once again, I just think Nate Mann, who plays Rosie, does an outstanding job.
Yeah, he really does. And I feel like when he was even talking to the doctors, they kind of talked about him being kind of like the drummer of the band and keeping the rhythm, keeping the beat. And I feel like he almost, when he does eventually get back, he has kind of like a little bit of a hesitation before he like jumps back into the plane. But like he understands and realizes how much some of these guys like look up to him and how he is a leader for these men. It's great. And like, I love the air combat. I love the action in this series, but I really do dig these kind of scenes where you see like there's obviously a lot more to war than the battles and stuff you see in like the movies. Being able to take the extra time and show what happens to guys trying to survive when they fell in enemy territory, how guys are dealing with their R&R and like everything, like really opening up and showing these guys' lives is fascinating, and that's why I definitely love this series so much.
Yeah, no, I once again I felt 5 and 6 like very much human stories, character stories, and you need that. I didn't sign on for a 9-part like action film shot in a fake CGI sky. Like so I appreciated these episodes. You mentioned him hesitating before doing that cool like grab the bottom and flip his legs in, and I was just like, you are a spry gentleman, Tom. I can see you doing that move without issue. I was like, if that was me, I'd need like 4 crewmen, and we'd have to do one of those cheerleader things where I like jumped through head first while they shot me through, because there's absolutely no way I'm kicking my legs above my head without pulling 7 muscles. They'd be like, oh, how did you get your Purple Heart? And I was like, oh, well, I tried to flip my body into the bomber, and I landed on my head. And that's how I got it. And they're like, I don't think that qualifies for a Purple Heart. And I'd be like, shh, don't make me try to jump through that hatch again. But
I've been getting free drinks at weddings for years.
Lost so many men to the Yankees. Yeah, I don't remember the exact line, but that's Wedding Crashers for you. All right, let's roll into part 7. All right, part 7. The main focus of this one is Bucky and Buck in the Stalag and like being POWs and how that world was, and then Rosie working towards his 25 missions, which 25 missions meant they went to go home. Tom, let's talk about the Stalag. How much time did you spend watching Hogan's Heroes on, like, I don't know, UPN 45 before school when you were a child? Are you familiar with Hogan's Heroes?
I didn't, man. I didn't watch any Hogan's Heroes. I didn't watch MASH. I feel like my old school television programming was Gilligan's Island. So I can make you a phone out of coconuts, but I couldn't escape Luftwaffe.
Well, these guys could have used a phone out of coconuts. We've got bamboo and coconuts in Germany. Anyways, the Das Coconuts, as they call them. Wait, that was something else. Okay, so Hogan's Heroes. Dom, I'm just going to talk about this really briefly. Hogan's Heroes was like a comedy sitcom about POWs, and I hope I've got this right. POWs in a Stalag, and like the very funny relationship between them constantly trying to escape and the commandant who ran it and the sergeant, like the bumbling German sergeant who, like, I don't know, they befuddled all the time. And so it was very much a comedy. If I went through this and then someone years later made Hogan's Heroes and like took like a brutal time in my life and made it into a comedy, I would be furious. I would lose my mind. But honestly, I don't know when Hogan's Heroes came out of a show, so maybe World War II veterans by the time it came out had a better sense of humor. But I don't know how anyone can laugh about the terrible situation these guys are in. They're in the Stalag. They are like being given... I thought those like jugs were food, but I think they were just water. Which is great. They're rationing water, and they're eating cats, which seemed not great for the one guy that had a weak stomach. But Tom, as a guy that loves eating cats, what did you think of this scene?
Yeah, I mean, I prefer dogs over cats, but I mean, cats have their place.
Oh, wow. Okay, listen. It's teambingepodcast@gmail.com. In the subject line, put Tom and dogs. I don't want to read these emails when you guys are mad at him about eating dogs. I'm the guy that eats cats. He's the guy that eats dogs. So send your emails accordingly. Thank you very much.
From your readings, is that a common thing for cats? Like, the idea of like cats just kind of coming in and running around these camps seemed odd.
Yeah, no, I haven't read anything about eating cats, but
did Hogan's Heroes eat cats?
I don't remember. I watched it, but once again, I wasn't there when that show came out. I will say this: there is just like, if you're a country losing a war and like expending a ton of resources, you're not going to take a bunch of food from your starving population and give it to the POWs. So were these guys in like horrible conditions? Maybe not as bad as guys that were POWs in, say, the Pacific, but it was pretty lean. Also, it just seems so cold. As Arizonans, between you and I, every time I see someone who's just got a leather jacket and they're in the cold German winter, I say no, thank you. I would not like to be in that situation.
I bet Iggy was kind of upset that he threw away his other jacket.
Yeah, that jacket was so much warmer. I would have worn it if it hadn't been for you. If I knew you were alive. And their only avenue to the outside world is listening on a pirated radio, the BBC. So this is like, I don't know, kids, this is like Napster for those of you. They were pirating sound from somewhere else. Is Napster still they were Pandora, they were Pandoring, they were Spotifying. Do kids know what a radio is? Surely they know what a radio is, right?
I mean, they have it on their car, but other than that, probably not.
Sure. So the Great Escape, I think, is a Steve McQueen movie, if I'm not mistaken. But they talk about in this episode like a large group of POWs escaping from a POW camp, and it's this terrible moment where this commandant informs all of our flyers that they executed 50 of them. And didn't like that at all.
Yeah, and I read something about, well, let's be honest, I didn't read it. I listened to something on the internet, a video talking about this episode, and like these guys that were spending years digging these tunnels, like it kind of reminded me of, which I'm sure Shawshank kind of ripped this off, but like as they're digging the tunnels, like put it in their pants, and they were like having all the dirt would like, as they're going for walks in the yard, they would kind of get rid of it. They never actually mentioned the name of the tunnels. They gave the tunnels names of Tom, Dick, and Harry. So, like, you know, you obviously never want to mention it. So anytime they refer to those three names, that's what they were referring to.
Right.
Just fascinating stuff.
They were like, I was elbows deep in Tom, Dick, and Harry, just filling my pockets with Tom, Dick, and Harry. And the German's like, who's Tom, Dick, and Harry? And he's like, they're tunnels. They're onto us. Everyone escape. And then that guy definitely gets shot. No. So once again, from the readings, what I thought was interesting is, and maybe I'm misremembering this, but there was kind of a gamesmanship between the POWs and their like Luftwaffe prison guards. And so I think what the show maybe doesn't do is like, when these guys found out these guys escaping were executed, like their idea was like, hey, they try to escape, they would then just be put back in the camp. Like if it's like, hey, we tried, we failed, you caught us, put us back. Yeah. And like in this situation, I don't know if the command came from on high, but these guys were executed, and it was like a devastating, because between Luftwaffe and the Army Air Corps, there was almost like a gentleman's agreement of, hey, we're both pilots, or we're all pilots, we're all flyers. Like, you know, we're a modern day like knighthood, and so there's a level of respect. And so I just remember reading that it was like very surprising that these guys that tried to escape were actually executed, as opposed to just put back into the camp and punished in such a way.
And was that the Luftwaffe's doing, or was that more like the fact like the Third Reich and the SS were like gaining more control and taking over, like is mentioned later in this episode? I
think that's what it came down to. I don't think the Luftwaffe working under their own like power or influence did it. But I don't know. At this point, I've read so many World War II books, they all jumble together. And as Shane Gillis says, it just makes me a Republican. So the conversation, I thought this was an interesting conversation. We have Clevin and Egan talking, Buck and Bucky talking. And I think Clevin mentions he proposes to Marge via mail through Red Cross POW, which is a bold move. Can you imagine had she said no? That would have been absolutely hilarious. She's like, I'm checking the box. No, thank you. And
will you marry me? Yeah, he creates 2 boxes, yes and no.
And she writes a third one. Make it home alive, and we'll see. The part I found interesting was Egan like having this moment where he's like, hey, I like lived it up, but I failed at finding someone who like cares about me now that I'm on the inside. And I thought that was just an interesting life lesson about living fast and loose with widows in hotels in London, because they're not going to write you when you're a POW. Kids, if you're listening, take note. They're not going to write you when you're a POW. But if you sadly propose to someone via mail from a POW camp, someone will love you. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, I like the difference that they continue to show us between these two, like, friends, right? Like, they're the greatest of friends, but they are definitely different people. Like, we saw it in the beginning of him not wanting, Clevin not wanting to sing, or he doesn't drink. Like, just all the, like, polar opposites, and kind of seeing it now come to a head with the fact that Clevin's got somebody that's going to marry him and spend the rest of his life with him, and Egan is still kind of living fast and loose, like you said. Even Egan wanting to like take the risks of trying to escape, where Clevin's like no, I've got something to kind of go home to. Like, I'm just gonna wait this out, kind of a deal.
Right. Yeah, I get the sense that when these guys throw Footloose on, they're rooting for different things. You know,
Yes.
Egan is all for the sinful dancing, and Clevin righteously is all for the outlawing of dancing. So. I don't want to give too much of my own personal leanings, but there's nothing more devastating than the Macarena and what it does to the hips of children. So,
and the hands and the arms.
And hands and the arms. Oh, man, how good was that song? All right, Macarena. Let's talk about Rosie working towards those... 25 missions. Golly, I don't think that was right at all, but let's move on.
25. There's no E in between, but good job.
Macarena. All right, so we have a moment that I thought was interesting, and I thought this was like a quick character development thing, and I think maybe there's some narration to go along with it, but in a lot of these, like, you go back to Band of Brothers and the Replacements episode, there is like this bitterness towards the guys that were joining the fight later. Like, hey, we've seen some stuff. You're the new guy. Let's razz you a little bit. Rosie's working on getting to 25. The new guys show up. Rosie, like, introduces himself. He's like, hey, I'll show you around. Let's connect after you eat. Like, there is something... just as like a leader and a person in terms of character that I really loved about Rosie in this moment, because you could be bitter, you could like razz the new guys, but he, was there to, good morale and teaching these guys things helps the mission and ends the war. And so exactly. I don't know. I really enjoyed that moment, even though it was a split second. I made note of him just being, a good dude, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, like, all these guys have been there. Like, Rosie's been there. He knows what it feels like to be new on this base, and clearly knows what it was like to kind of get through his first mission. So being there for these guys just to show where the mess hall is, or just be there, like, it goes a long way.
Right. Or how to give a code red to the guy, just like in A Few Good Men, Anyways, I did not like the yada yada of Quinn and Bailey. I did not like this one bit. This was like a main storyline, and I don't know. I wasn't in love with these characters, but I was certainly interested in the journey that they were going to go on. Right. And all of a sudden, Quinn and Bailey are riding bikes across the airfield. I was a bit surprised by this, and while I thought 5 and 6 were strong episodes, 7, there were a couple of things that happened in 7 that kind of took me out of it a little bit. But
yeah, I tend to agree. Like they did, and again, I appreciate that they did do like show the French underground or whatever, and trying to take these guys like out of these occupied areas and traffic them through like they're under the Germans' nose. But it was just a very quick thing. They're riding bikes in the airfield. They give a quick little aside saying, hey, they can't go back up because if they go down again, they'll get interrogated and they'll figure out where these like trails are or whatever from this French people that were helping getting out and smuggling them. But I would have excuse me. But I would have much preferred to get a little bit more of their storyline and see what they had to go through to get back to base.
Yeah, because they have this moment where we're on that train and Quinn runs, and then we have the other woman like stop him and be like, "Don't ever do that again." And you really, I mean, I wonder if they're going to do like these two sitting down and telling their story in one of the episodes. I guess that would be the only.
Did they already send him home though?
I don't know.
They just can't fly again.
They can't fly, so they're on base. So they're just at the E Club drinking and like
bartenders.
High-fiving and being like, "Oh, you know, on my second mission we got shot down. By the way, I can't fly anymore." I don't know. They were like, "Oh, they shot this one guy Bob right in the face in front of us. It was hilarious." I don't know. I feel like we're 9 episodes in this series. Let's go 10 and just give me a Quinn and Bailey episode. Like, yeah, I don't know.
I agree.
I don't know. Maybe Quinn and Bailey, like, it was one of those things, they're child actors and they grew too quickly. And so they were like, oh, this episode's never going to work. These guys grew 3 feet and their uniforms don't fit anymore. Anyways, CGI them shorter.
Quinn did have like a baby face. Was it Quinn or Bailey?
Quinn did. Bailey looked like not the baby face. So... Actually, no, Babyface is who Quinn let die in the airplane, Tom. That's who Babyface was. Brutal. All right. We talk about Black Monday, which is March 6th, 1944, which is where they finally drop bombs on Berlin. This was big news because the German higher command was like, a bomb will never fall on Germany. Insert Jimmy, can you put a German accent on what I just said?
A bomb will never fall on Germany.
Okay. Yeah. No. Dial it back a little bit, Jimmy. That was honestly terrible. So just...
The bomb will never fall on the Germany.
Perfect. Thanks, Jimmy. Keep that. And mark this one explicit so my mom doesn't listen to it because she's going to be upset. They lose 150 men, which is 15 bombers. Over Berlin, and there's just a giant air battle. And
did we see this air battle, or is this the one where they kind of like talk about the battle, but then ultimately just show the chaos back on the runway and the crews coming in to try to save them? Like, I thought that was very, because we've obviously seen a lot of dogfighting, or not dogfighting, but we've seen a lot of like air battles and things, so we didn't necessarily need another big epic sequence. So I like the way this was shot of just how the aftermath is handled.
Right. And this is Rosie hitting his 25th mission, which means he gets to be rotated stateside, and he's choosing between Texas and Florida. He's like, oh, they're both going to vote Republican, so I'll go to either. But it's my second Republican reference. If you're playing Team Binge Bingo. And this is something that is talked about in, once again, I've mentioned it before, the great novel Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, where the goalposts of when they could go home keeps getting moved. So these original guys, it was 25. Then it gets moved to 30, and they do some sort of chicanery where those guys that are already there in between, so then they have to reach 28. And this is, something I find very fascinating, and just how demoralizing it would be when you're like, I'm 1 mission away, and then all of a sudden it's 3 missions away, and then it's 5 missions away. And I understand why they did it. Like, the attrition of crews, you needed to keep veterans around. it's any company that's trying to keep their people. Like, I understand it, but it just morale wise would have been devastating.
Oh yeah, and was that one guy reacts to it and says like they're just trying to kill us at this point. Like it's just, I mean, even surviving 25 seems insane to try to get up to 28 to 30. It's just absolutely brutal. And was it when Rosie was doing this last flight, he starts talking about, and I think you had mentioned on pod, what's this new fighter plane that kind of comes in and seemingly kind of turns the tide, right? Because now they're getting more or less escorts on their bomb rates.
Yeah, so they ultimately were able to develop the Mustang. I'm going to go P-51. I might be wrong. It might be an earlier version. But P-51 Mustang could fly like farther and longer. It had an external fuel tank. And there's a note in the book where like you knew when Luftwaffe were around because those little buddies, those little fighters, would drop their external fuel tanks before they went into like dogfight mode. So they were able to have these external fuel tanks filled with extra fuel to stick with the bombers longer. And then, they would, so they just had better range. So I'm
quite certain.
Go ahead.
I'm quite certain they can go at least 7,000 to 8,000 miles per hour. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Email Tom at teambingepodcast@gmail.com. Put in the subject line 8,000 to 7,000 miles an hour. What's interesting about the show is they show a group of African American pilots in the like credit sequence. And at no point during the show have we talked about like the Tuskegee Airmen, which were the like, because unfortunately at the time the military was segregated, and they would have been the first like African American fighter pilots. And so I'm very interested for when they get to that storyline.
I think it's in episode 8. Like I purposely don't watch the trailers because I know I'm going to watch the show. I don't need to see what's coming next. But I feel like in the like screen grab on Apple for the next episode, it's got a Tuskegee Airman and one of the Mustangs behind him.
Sure. And I mean, for anyone that hasn't watched it, there is a old, I think it's like an HBO movie called The Tuskegee Airmen with Lawrence Fishburne and Cuba Gooding Jr. Rest in peace. It's got Andre Brower in it from Reno, not Reno 911, from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and it's their story. So I'm interested to know because in Masters of the Air, while it's talked about, it's not a focus. So I'm interested to know what they do with that story and how they tell it. But they flew Mustangs. And
yeah, it's Masters of the Air. We focus so much like on like the bombing rates and stuff like that. It'd be interesting to see a little and learn a little bit more about some of like the dogfighting and things that were going on with these kind of fighter planes. Sure.
Well, the 8th, they separated bomber groups from fighter groups, like B-17s from B-24s, and then from these smaller fighters. So it's interesting, and I'm pretty sure, and Lord knows if it's apocryphal or not, but like the Tuskegee Airmen were known for never losing a plane that they escorted. And so they had quite a record. But all of that to say, yes, they do have fighter escorts, and this leads to a weird conversation. And once again, I appreciated how Nick Mann played this, but he is in the CO's office. We get this new CO, who I really appreciated. He was the guy that stood up in front of him and was like, listen, this is a tough mission. I will be flying lead. I thought that was dope. I was like, that's the guy you want to follow. And that's how military people talk. They're like, that commander's dope. And then they say sir afterwards.
That's pretty dope, sir.
Pretty dope, sir. Oh, man. Anyways. Rosie requests to re-up, which is essentially, hey, I hit my missions. I've earned a right to go home, but I can't do this knowing these new guys, without veterans, like the mission's still on. I'm going to re-up. The CO almost tries to talk him out of it, which once again, I thought was, honestly, that's what a leader does. He's like, hey, are you making the right choice for you? And I almost guarantee that CO is like, I want Rosie to stay, but I also, like as a human being, know that if he stays, he's probably going to die. And so And ultimately, he gives them a heads up. Hey, before you re-up, you should know this.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, we're going to use the bombers as bait, essentially, right? And like have these fighter planes try to take out the rest of the Luftwaffe air support. So, I mean, again, and what does Rosie do? He still signs and wants to re-up. It's incredible.
Yep, and Rosie Rosenthal's story is pretty interesting. Both in the books that I've been reading, they speak very highly of him. So just an incredible individual. Tom, I ended our outline by writing Harry cheats with Sandra. And I don't know if that's a next on or if that was part of this episode.
We get a little bit of Crosby, and like I think the way he's trying to deal with the chaos that is the war here, like he ends up going back to London, I think, frequently and gets intimate with Sandra.
Ties her shoes, as we like to say. I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier. Let me scroll in the outline that Harry is married. He took vows, and that adultery is against the good book. So I stand by that statement. I will always stand by that statement.
So many bearskins, though, man. Only one man can. So what can one man do against so many bearskins?
So many bearskin koozies and
top hats.
Top hats. Oh, wow. It's New Year's,
Socks.
apparently. All right. Tom, we did it in an hour. Congratulations to us. 3 episodes in an hour is some kind of record for Team Binge. For those of you that have joined us, we appreciate you. I don't know what the reception of the show has been. All the other series were HBO shows, and this being an Apple show, I don't know if that affects like the ratings and the viewership. Obviously, we all compare it to Band of Brothers, even though we try not to. It's just a different show. So I hope people are enjoying it. Once again, I think these stories are important. This is a bad time when I'm about to say this story is important. I want to say one thing that really bummed me out in part 7, Tom, is there is a moment when Rosie and his crew hit 25 and they're flying back to base and they're in the cockpit and the camera like turns to Rosie's co-pilot and the co-pilot's like, Rosie, we did it. We hit 25. And then it cuts to Rosie and Rosie's like, yeah, man, we hit 25, which means we get to go home. It was such a weird, like, no show, we get it. Like, we know why they're striving to 25. It took me out of it. I was almost like, who shot this? Like, did like a student film come in and they were like, hey, you got 6 seconds, you can put it in this Apple? I don't know. It was just such a weird shot that it almost ruined this episode for me because I was like, we got it. We're not dumb. We understand what's happening.
I almost thought like the way they did that extra flyby and then kind of like flew around the base a little bit before ultimately then just celebrating on the tarmac. Like I almost thought there was going to be some sort of tragic ending where he's doing a flyby and just something dumb happens. I was like, that's the way I thought it was being filmed. I'm with you.
Guy died hang gliding. What an idiot. Oh, look at me. I'm flying. Oh, I'm dead. Oh, man. There you go. That's the second Wedding Crashers reference of the episode.
For your Team Binge bingo card.
All right.
2 Republican references, 2 Wedding Crashers references.
Drink. All right. Well, for those of you that are joining us for this show, we appreciate you. We have a back catalog for some other great shows. Tom can talk through those. You can reach us at teambingepodcast@gmail.com. If I got any of my World War II history wrong, I don't care, but you're welcome to reach out to me. Tom, what did I miss?
Yeah, like Julian mentioned, we did a lot of fantastic shows. You can check them all in our back catalog. The best one probably being The Rings of Power. You definitely don't want to miss that one from Amazon. Probably our most favorite show. But follow us on Twitter, on Instagram at Team Binge or at Team Binge Podcast. Continue the conversation there. We've got 2 more episodes left. I kind of wish there were more, if I'm being honest. But it's been a very great show to watch and excited for the final 2.
Yep. Let's quote Tom as he wishes World War II was longer. That's what he just said. All right. For Team Binge, I have been Julian.
And I have been Tom. Till next time, everybody.